Yeah, let's start now, please.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Feel welcome for today's session. I wish to welcome all of us who are joining from the different media platforms. Those here on Zoom, we have some on Facebook and the YouTube. Feel welcome for today's episode, which is the 6th episode in the In Conversation series. The In Conversation series portrays the prominent innovation scholars of the day in the form of intellectual biographical interviews with other senior scholars. In today's interview, we'll be having Bengt, a well-known scholar who has been a mentor to many, will be being interviewed by Jean Fagerberg. The idea of this conversation is just to understand the evolution of this prominent innovation scholar as an intellectual being. This is very critical, both to the scholar himself and also to the other younger generation that are coming up, because it's such like a mentorship program, which will motivate the younger generation as we come up in the innovation sphere. In this 6th event, as I've earlier mentioned, we'll have Bengt Lundvall, who will be interviewed by Jean Fagerberg. Many of us know Bengt either through literature or we've been able to meet him personally. We have referred him in many of our literature as we work on innovation, and he'll be here to converse with us today. Among us, we'll have the panelists, who is Rasma Lema, we have Marianne, and we also have Anne. Just to take you through today's program, after this introduction, I'll be able to invite Jean Fagerberg, where they'll be able to have introductory remarks. Both him and Bal will give their introductory remarks. Then after that, they'll get into the conversation for the next 1 hour. After the 1 hour conversation, we'll take a break for 5 minutes, where we'll be able to pause the coming conversation that is coming after this. And after the break, we'll invite each of the panelists to ask their questions. After the discussion between the panelists and Bengt, we'll open to the floor. We hope to be through in exactly 2 hours after this. So, to introduce Jean, Professor Jean Fagerberg studied history, political science, and economics before he graduated from the University of Bergen in 1980 with a degree in economics. He's also a PhD holder from the University of Sussex, where he was at the Science Policy Research. Fagerberg is affiliated with Center of Technology, Innovation, and Culture at the University of Oslo. His affiliations include the Norwegian Ministry of Finance, the Norwegian Institute of Foreign Affairs, and the University of Lund and Aalborg. In his research, Fagerberg has, among other things, focused on relationship between technology innovation and diffusion on one hand, and competitiveness of economic growth and development on the other hand. He has also worked on innovation theory, innovation systems, and innovation policy. Fagerberg has published extensively on these and other topics in books and journals, and many of us have used him as a reference in our research. His research is widely cited and disseminated. Recently, Fagerberg has been engaged in a number of activities intended to map our current knowledge about innovation and stimulate discussions about the research agenda in this area. He has worked with Bengt in the recent past, and beside that, he has been able to publish a number of books. Today, I wish to bring to you Jean Fagerberg, who will be guiding us through the conversation for the next 1 hour. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you for this kind introduction, and thank you all, and also thanks to the organizers for inviting me to have this conversation with Bengt, with whom, as she correctly pointed out, I have worked with for a very long time. Indeed, I think that before I met Bengt, I was well on the way to be a successful bureaucrat in the Ministry of Finance. But after I met him, my fate was sealed, so to say. So, maybe Bengt doesn't need a very long introduction. I will say a few things anyway. Bengt, he is Swedish, not Danish, and he has his education from Sweden. We will come back to that. But sometime in the 1970s, I believe, he put himself on the ferry from Gothenburg and got to northern Jutland, where he joined at that time young entrepreneurial university center in Aalborg, with which he has been affiliated ever since. So I think the university has changed somewhat, but Bengt hasn't changed, right? So he also had a stint at the OECD as a deputy director, and he has been associated with Tsinghua University in Beijing for a number of years, and also visited several other places. I am going to say a little bit about Bengt various works. Of course, he has published a lot. He has almost 60,000 citations in Google Scholar. That is massive. I think nobody else in the audience, including myself, is close to that. And of course, that's spread over a number of contributions, but a very important contribution is the book he edited on national systems of innovation in 1992, which has around 24,000 citations. There is an influential paper on the learning economy, co-written with Björn Jonsson from 1994. And then a series of contributions on learning in one way or another. The book Innovation, Growth and Social Cohesion, the Danish Model from 2002. That book, as the title says, focused on Denmark, but there is a following contribution that focuses broader on Europe, how Europe's economies learn, with Ned Lawrence in 2006. And also the I think very well-known article, forms of knowledge modes and modes of innovation in research policy from 2007, with a number of co-authors. And finally, then I will mention his very last book from 2021, because Bengt he doesn't stop, about the digital innovation race with Cecilia Erika. Bengt, in addition to doing all this stuff, is also, perhaps even more than any other things, he is a creator of collective arenas for cooperation and exchange of views and further development and so on. And among those arenas that he has created are Druid and then of course Globelix. So I'm not going to say much more about Bengt, but I will then go on with the conversation, although much more could be said. So Bengt, do you hear me? Maybe you can unmute yourself.
I need to unmute. Yes, I do hear you very well.
That's fine. So we will. The purpose of this conversation is to focus on some main themes in your research over the years as it evolved, but also on your background. So I think I will start in the beginning with that, with the period before you came to Lundberg and published all these wonderful things. So I understand that you did not start in economics. You actually started to study law and political science. So maybe my first question could be, why did you leave political science and why did you go to economics?
I think actually it was some element of chance because the Swedish system, you have to combine a couple of disciplines, and since I started with political science, I had to find something else to do afterwards, and I then ended up with moving into economics. So I think actually I have tried to think, because trying to track back if I had some reason to go into economics, and actually I did read Gunnar Myrdal, who is quite famous development economist in Sweden. And I did read him already in college. And I found the issue about economic development and the way he tackled these problems as a phenomena of cumulative causation and vicious circles and things like that. I'm not sure I understood it completely at that time, but I think it actually influenced me in the very long run, at least, these kind of things. But the answer is that it was not a kind of very strategic planning leading me into economics.
But are you still happy with the choice?
I think so. I mean, when people ask me what is my profession, I always answer, I'm a kind of economist. And then they ask me, what do you mean by that? And then I say, I'm not a mainstream economist, and I'm not very proud of the profession of economist. I think they could do much better, the mainstream. But then when you get into a special field like economics of innovation, things become completely different, because there we have some founding fathers like Chris Freeman and Dick Nelson, etc., who have created a kind of environment which is quite nice, at the same time as what they are doing is highly relevant. So in that sense, I am happy with the way I specialized in the direction within economics.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. But I understand that at the time in Sweden, you were attracted to Marxian economics, as many people were at the time, and you started to write a PhD treatise about the falling rate of profit, right?
That is, yes.
Yes. So, and you also are one of the authors of a highly successful textbook in Marxian political economy. So reflecting on that today, is it something from your experience or your past as a Marxian economist that is still with you today, and that influenced your research and your perspectives and so on? Or was it more a special episode in your life?
If I may make a little parenthesis here, I would like to mention that the Department of Economics in Gothenburg was quite unique. It was definitely unique in Sweden because the left wing had a kind of majority among the young professors. And for a period, we didn't have any senior professor to stop us from doing interesting things. So we actually could be examined in the 3 volumes of Capital. And one very important thing was that we had an excellent economic historian, Lars Herlitz, who gave courses in the history of economic thought. And I think that to get a kind of feeling of standard economics, how it stands in a historical perspective is very important. And just one more general observation is that what we are going to discuss here is stuff I have done, but I have done very, very little by myself. I mean, innovation studies is like innovation, a cumulative process. And I have had so many fantastic collaborators with whom I have developed ideas together. So it's just to say that. Now I come to your question. Sorry for this parenthesis. No, yes, I would say not no, yes. I actually think there are different things. I mean, one thing is the kind of general outlook which characterize both Marx and Schumpeter, where they take a kind, where they insist on having a kind of historical perspective on what's going on. I think that should be part of all social scientists. And also, more specifically, when I worked with on this problem with the falling rate of profit, I found the solution. I never finalized the thesis, by the way. I lived and worked at the period where you could survive without a PhD. I'm afraid it's much more difficult now, because I was recruited to Aalborg, and to build a new university was not only a full-time, more than full-time work for several years. And when I finalized, it was not really necessary to do it. Anyhow, what came out of this was that I solved the problem of the falling rate of profit, and then it had all to do with the rate of productivity change in the different sectors, major sectors or departments of the economy. And this has, in a sense, inspired a lot of my work after that, trying to explain, trying to treat productivity as an endogenous process, where trying to explain and understand. And of course, innovation, organizational change are different dimensions, which are obviously important when it comes to understand the rate of productivity. And because of my Marxist background, I try to link this to the situation of working people, how wages interacted with productivity in producing inflation or not inflation. And I wrote some mainstream journal articles in Danish around 1974 on this topic. So I would say it's an example that failure, not finalizing a thesis, can be a very important step towards understanding interesting things.
So we will now move slowly from the Marxian Lundvall to the Schumpeterian Lundvall. And because when I read many of your works, it is difficult not to think that this rather specific Swedish Schumpeterian tradition with people like Erik Dahmén and Staffan Burenstam Linder and others, and many of these are very conservative people. But the kind of things they put their emphasis on, like innovation, clusters, and also in the case of Burenstam Linder, the demand side and learning and user-producer interaction and these kind of things. Would you agree that this was an important source of inspiration for you, or is it more a coincidence?
No, I think, but I would mention two other names. Erik Lundberg, who was also a kind of liberal, politically liberal, but who had made some work on learning by doing. He studied a case study, a kind of steelwork, where he showed that productivity was growing in spite of very limited change in the technology. It was really, and I think Kenneth Arrow refers to him. But you also had a labor market on the Swedish model, where you saw a raise in the wage rate, also rising wages, as something speeding up structural change. Unproductive units disappeared, and at the same time they pushed the survivors to become more productive. So Erich Meidner and others in this tradition, they emphasize productivity not as exogenous factor to which wages should be adapted, but increasing wages as something raising productivity. So there were elements of this which played a role in convincing me that it was meaningful to try to understand productivity as an endogenous variable.
Thank you. Okay, then we take a big leap and we go to your most well-known work, the book about national systems of innovation from 1992. I will first quote a few sentences from that work. So on page 1, you write that the most fundamental resource is knowledge, and the most important process is learning, understood as an interactive, socially embedded process. So I think that is the Lundvall perspective in a nutshell. You then go on to discuss national systems innovation, and you then characterize your own perspective as, and I quote, the emphasis put on interactive learning and anchored in the production structure and linkages. And I think this is a very original perspective in many ways on economic development. And there is a very strong emphasis on the production structure. So learning is something that occurs in the production structure through routine, repeated activities, and in which workers and engineers take part. And I think at one stage you even thought of calling it the national system of production rather than innovation. Isn't that right? Originally. Would you like to comment on that?
I think I mean Christopher Freeman has meant very, very much for me. I mean, he was 20 years older, but we became very, very close. Also because he also had strong roots in Marxist thinking, and at the same time we came to innovation from different perspectives. Chris was, I think, was fascinated by the role of science as a potential to create a better society, and he was also in line with Schumpeter, giving very strong emphasis on radical change and even technological revolutions. So this stands in contrast with other scholars such as Marshall or others who look more at incremental change. And what I think is that the Freeman perspective and the one you were referring to, the way I have put it, they are complementary, and you need both, because I see economic development as a kind of pulsation where you have periods, and of course Carlota, who is with us here together with Chris, has developed that in an excellent way. So I think I'm very proud of my own way of thinking, but I would, which of course I shared with a lot of other people, but I would say it cannot stand alone. It needs to be combined with an understanding of both with the science-based approaches, radical change, and even technological revolution.
So one peculiar aspect of your work on natural system simulation is that you place a major emphasis on learning through producer-user interaction and to interactive processes, and then you write, where both parties are professional users, that is, not consumers. But as you know, there is another strand of literature which is very close to your way of thinking by Erik von Hippel and others that place a very strong emphasis on the role of consumers and even almost the entire innovation activity may origin from there. And in some later work, you seem to place a bit more emphasis on consumers. So how do you look at that now?
No, but I think we have always had specific areas where final consumers are professional in a sense, and many of the examples that von Hippel, the case studies he has made, has been what do you call this kind of skateboards, or it has been people working in gaming on computers, etc. They may be final users, but they are highly qualified and highly specialized, and thereby they actually contribute to the innovation. So I think this has been around all the time. But I also think that just to take one example, I mean, in order to survive socially in Denmark, you need to have rather advanced IT skills. All communication with the state takes place through the internet. And I think this was developed quite early on, and of course that has an impact on innovation processes, on the kind of feedback which does not come individually perhaps, but experiences and of course on the rate of diffusion. So in that sense, I think final consumers do have an important role to play. What is fascinating, and I haven't worked that out, is what this new digital type of system where the tech giants they draw upon consumption patterns and transform them into innovative activities or locate specific areas where innovation should take place, which means that my idea of our user producer was to some degree more face to face. And what happens with the role of how the innovation process is transformed, where the feedback becomes purely digital. It's a challenge to, I think, to do research in this area.
So moving on to the learning economy, which is another very successful concept that you have launched. And it's already there in the 1994 article, but it also figures prominently in the books that you produced during the 2000s on Denmark and on Europe and so on. A very fundamental assumption there is this idea of accelerating change, transformation pressure. And you talked about this already in the 90s, but that is perhaps even more relevant now, or how do you see it? I mean, is this constantly accelerating? Is your perspective more and more relevant as time goes by, to put it?
No, it's a good question. I mean, we saw the rate of change as depending on global competition and technological change, among other factors. And we saw specific technologies such as information and communication technology as playing a major role in speeding up change. We gave some example which showed that 2 years after a computer engineer had finalized his training and got his degree, 50% of what he had learned had already become obsolete. And this was one reason why a lot of computer engineering students left their studies and began to work because things were moving so quickly. And this is, of course, it took us other examples. I think the perspective is useful, even if I mean it sounds a little absurd to say that something is accelerating all the time. I would rather say that the kind of Freeman Perez perspective where you have periods of more radical change, where this perspective is especially relevant.
Anyway, in these contributions, in a way, you outline a framework for analysis of change, but also, I think, for policy, where you have transformation pressure coming from this accelerating change, which means that that countries have to be able to adapt and change all the time, and it's this ability or capability to adapt and change which becomes the most important variable. And you then say that this also has to do with the distribution of costs and benefits of change on the various actors in the economic system, and that this raises important challenges for governance. And you then particularly highlighted the Danish model as an example for others. So what can we learn from the Danish model today?
No, I think that the emphasis, and not only the Danish, I think the Swedish and probably also Norwegian model would be relevant. But I mean, it's an emphasis on reskilling people who get unemployed, investing in lifelong learning opportunities for all kinds of groups, etc. May I just mention, I thought about it earlier today, that when I presented this paper, one of the first and few times in Paris, Passinetti, you know Luigi Passinetti?
Absolutely.
he was there, and I didn't know that. It was like me, a white-haired, distinguished gentleman who sat on the row at the end, and he actually said that this learning economy was a very good idea. And I asked him, but you in your book say that you make no attention to explain what drives knowledge and how drives learning and explains. And he said, and I asked, do you mean that economists should not look into that? And he said, no, you are on the right track. That was very important inspiration for my work on the learning economy. Then in that was 93, I think. And then in 95, when I came back to Aalborg after having worked at OECD, I gave an inaugural lecture on what I call the social dimension of the learning economy. And that was, the idea is that when you have rapid change and it depends on upgrading skills, those who have skills are normally privileged. And so you have built into the dynamics of the system a tendency towards polarization. So if you leave it to market forces, and if you do not have an active state which redistributes the benefits of change in favor of those who otherwise become victims, you get a more and more polarized society. And there I see the Nordic models as focusing, at least they did so more perhaps before, but focusing on upgrading the skills of the low skilled. I think that is the most efficient and important way of tampering, doing something about growing inequality.
Okay. One particular issue that that you or suggestion that you come up with in this book on innovation, growth, and social cohesion, when you discuss European policymakers, is that you suggest that there should be a high-level council for innovation and competence building at the European level. You still believe this would be a good idea?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, and I think so at different levels, regional, national levels, and I would like to emphasize that it's not only about science technology, and it has to do with the other thing you mentioned. I mean, we developed the idea I did together with Edward Lawrence, who have played a very important role as collaborators through the last 20 years. We developed the distinction between experience-based learning and science-based learning. And this is the background why I also in GlobalX prefer to talk about competence building, innovation and competence building systems. I think there's a complementarity between them. And I also think in order to take income distribution issues, etc., into account. I know in some cases, like Finland, there was some efforts to develop policies more directly oriented towards experience-based learning or DUI learning, as we call it. And this is why I think you should have this broader representation in such a national or European council, including labor market, education, industrial policy, together with science and technology policy.
So maybe we can conclude that the welfare state is good for innovation, not the opposite, as many people used to argue. Isn't that a kind of
developmental state?
Yes.
Or what did you say? Just
the welfare state.
The welfare, yes, yes. No, I think the welfare state is a way of redistributing. I compare in some of this analysis of learning economy, I compared it with the Japanese system, which is another way of redistributing costs and benefits of transformation, where you had, at least before, something like lifelong learning and gradual upskilling of many parts. But it was more corporate than through the corporations more than through the state.
So I think that in the benefit of time, we should move to some of your later work and perhaps focus on China, the catching up of the Chinese economy, and the relevance of system innovation thinking, national systems innovations for that. Is China, would you think that China is a kind of model for present-day developing countries for how they might catch up themselves and secure a better?
The Chinese themselves, they always talk about national innovation system with Chinese characteristics. And I think they got an important point. I mean, they have a long, quite unique history with very dramatic ups and downs. And they are very big. China is, India is, could be comparative in terms of size. But I think what China did, and here again, I would like to refer to Chris Freeman's work on Japan, where he explained the relative success of MITI, the Ministry of Industry in Japan, with the fact that it was a majority of engineers, not economists, who determined industrial policy. In China, the top people for at least a decade more, I think, was all trained as engineers and scientists, and they had, together with a kind of inspiration for Marx, that science is a very important productive force. They engaged in policies which led to an extremely rapid growth in scientific in science and scientific training, etc. And this was paired with, as I experienced when I worked there, a kind of population where everybody saw education as the way ahead. That was a willingness to sacrifice enormous to get their kids to get a good education. And I think the combination of these things have been one prerequisite for China's race. This doesn't mean, of course, that I mean, Chris Freeman, he has a very provocative terminology where he talks about voluntary underdevelopment. And I think what he means by that is that if you do not invest in knowledge, if you do not invest in science, technology, you cannot have economic development. So in that sense, I would say it's a model. There are other aspects of the Chinese system which are much more on the front page these days, where it's presented in very, very black tones. And some of that is, of course, not completely wrong. But when it comes to linking science, technology to economic development, I think China has been quite successful.
Yeah, there is no doubt that China's economic performance has been impressive and that it has come a long way. But it's interesting to ask the question: how far is it on the road to perhaps becoming a new technological and economic leader in the world, or something like that? And in the book with Cecilia Rikap, you argue that China now actually is the front runner in a number of technologies, and you list high-speed trains, wind turbines, supercomputers, liquid crystal displays, and various types of space satellite technologies. Now, I did some homework before this interview. I Googled all these technologies. And I found that the Chinese were quite dominating in high-speed trains. But in all these other areas, there were also many foreign firms among the leaders. And for example, in wind turbines, the leading firm is Vestas by a wide margin, a Danish firm. And there are other German and US firms among the top 5 in the sector. And the same is more or less true for these other areas. So wouldn't it be more correct to say that China, we are not in the situation of a change of leadership, but China is just one of those countries that are up there on the frontier?
I think what is interesting is that when we studied Chinese, I don't read Chinese, but we studied translations of Chinese policy documents, etc. It's like as if they had read carefully work by Carlota Perez and Chris Freeman, and that they look for strategic technologies which play a kind of special role. And here we point to artificial intelligence. And they have expectations that if they get close to leadership in that area, it would have a major spillover effect on the whole economy. And in some of these digital service areas, like the use of digital services in finance, they seem to be ahead of United States and other countries. But I'm not, you should remember that in 1980, China was still an extremely poor country, and we're only past 40 years. And I would say becoming a world leader in some technologies have turned out to be especially difficult to catch up in, like semiconductors. I think most experts expect, and these are crucial for this other ambition on artificial intelligence. So I think experts are like Dieter Ernst is expecting that it might take China another at least 10, 15 years to reach, to get really closer to United States in such areas. So I think you're right in the sense that China is not in absolute terms leader in many technologies, but I think their approach, where they see the potential of developing and using artificial intelligence, may give further surprises. I mean, most people still are already quite surprised by how far they got, given their economic system, which many thought could not promote innovation.
Okay, I would like to this latest book by yourself and Cecilia Rikap focuses, of course, mainly on artificial intelligence, and there you describe this as a technological revolution in the Schumpeterian, Freeman, Perez type of reasoning. But I wonder how sure you are about that, and how many technological revolutions can we have at the same time? Because I and many other people have argued that actually what is happening in renewable energy also is a technological revolution. Yeah, what's going on here, Bengt?
Yeah, actually we don't say, we say we see it as a second phase or a second stage of the ICT revolution. I mean, it's still a lot of, at the core of it is a lot of ICT. It's more that the big scale application in digital services has had a major impact on the underlying technology, and we also discuss it as a technology produce new technology, etc. So I have some. I would like to have a chance to discuss this much more with Con Lee, who is there. I hope he's there. I can see his picture because he has located some technologies which have played a key role in catching up, and those are what he called short cycle. And the interesting thing with artificial intelligence that it's not really short cycle, because the first ideas and practical attempts to develop it goes back to the end of the Second World War. So I would like to have a discussion on how this fits together. But my intuition, that's all I can offer here. And that contrasts very much with Con Lee, who is doing very systematic, empirical, quantitative studies. My intuition is that it is something which is going to have a major impact on technological development itself, and that it will who gets in control of this kind of technology is really crucial for the pecking order in the world. That is my intuition. Of course, the intuition is to some degree based on some factual observation, but I agree with you. It's not something I can give strong evidence in favor of.
I think we have time for one final question, Lilian. Sticking now with technological revolutions and artificial intelligence and so on. If this is the second phase of technological revolution, and as you argue, it's monopolized by a small number of corporations worldwide that monopolize the innovation and the rewards from innovation of these technologies. What can we do on that? Because one of the important aspects of this literature on technological revolutions that has been developed by Carlota Perez, and another concept is techno-economic paradigm, right? That such revolutions has to go along with important social, organizational, and institutional changes to run their course. And you speculate a little bit about that towards the end of your recent book. And you say that you need a truly democratic enlightenment. A fair and sustainable society for all. So what kind of changes would be needed to get there?
I will not be able to answer satisfactorily in 1 minute. I would like to sidestep the question somewhat and say that my work in that book with Cecilia Ricap is to some degree I give stronger emphasis to political economy more than the style that I worked with in the 1970s. But there is, if I relate it to my other work on innovation, it's also more critical, because most innovation studies, there we think about innovation as a positive thing that we might use to promote either economic growth or sustainability or social objectives. In this book, we we take a slightly different perspective where we see how innovation can be used to establish enormous market power at the global level, where these tech giants take rents, not only profits, but they exploit their monopolistic positions to take rents from all over the world, and also from exploiting subordinate organizations' efforts to develop new technology. They take that as well. So all this, I would like to say, this is a shift in perspective, and I think actually that at the core of this issue is something with knowledge sharing, and knowledge sharing both at in relation to intellectual property rights, trying to work out new rules and breaking down barriers for knowledge sharing across countries. I think, I mean, in China could play a progressive role if it, for instance, established what you call the you have the BRI, what we call it, where I mean when they establish infrastructure in Africa and other countries, a physical infrastructure, it would be much more progressive if they engaged in big-scale knowledge sharing with African countries, Latin American countries, etc. And I think might be very difficult because so much effort has been on accumulating intellectual properties in China. Actually, now China has the most patents, more than United States. So, but I'm saying that I think, and this is of course very abstract and vague in a sense, but I think a key issue here is to establish new institutional context with a stronger global governance, with a focus on knowledge sharing. I think, Jan, you have done some work yourself on when it comes to green technologies, that these kind of knowledge should be shared with less developed countries, and they should be supported in the diffusion of that, etc. And I think these kind of perspectives are important, but the way such changes come about is not, I'm afraid, through international meetings, etc. I think there's a need. That is why we talk about some democratic grassroots activities. I think there's a need that you get some very broadly founded popular activities in order to bring around the kind of change which is necessary. I'm afraid I cannot say much more.
Okay, I think that our 60 minutes have just passed. So I would like to thank you for the privilege to have this conversation with you, Bengt, and to the organizers who made it possible. So thank you all very much. And should we give a little applause to Bengt?
Thank you, Jan. I think you put many good questions, and I tried to give the best answers I could.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan and Bentoke. Just as he says, Jan, you asked so many good questions. And Bentoke, with your wisdom, you've answered them so wisely. We're happy. I think each of us has benefited from this session. Thank you for the moment and the time you have given for this conversation. It has actually been interesting. At this juncture, I want us to take a break, just 5 minutes break. During the break, Rajesh will be able to post the next session that is coming, the next conversation. Then after 5 minutes, we'll just come back. The panel will be here to ask their questions, and some of the questions that you've had on the chat, also Bentoke will have an opportunity to respond to them. Any other question can continue being posted on the chat. Thank you. Hello,
Could
you
I
have
take a
something to
minute?
say? Yeah.
Could I
Yes,
take a
please.
minute?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
I want to remind all the PhD students and anybody who's a recent graduate, 3 years or so, of the Chris Freeman essay competition, which is until the end of this month. So there's only like 10 days left, I hope, 8 days left. I hope you're already writing and that you will not miss the deadline. So we're waiting for your essays. We're very interested. If you, of course, I imagine everybody who, maybe if I share screen, can I share screen?
Please do.
Yeah. Yeah, just to remind you that this is the poster. I'm going in my Twitter feed, Carlotta Press Perez, just Perez twice without E's. I'll be putting it up just in case you don't have it up. So we hope to get many of you participating. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope the PhD students have noted. So we'll take a 5 minutes break. Meanwhile, Rajesh, you can post the next conversation. Thank you. See you in 5 minutes.
Is it visible, Lillian, the poster?
Yeah? Yes. The poster for the next meeting. Our next meeting is on 11th July 2022. We'll have Carlotta, who has just spoken. We'll be in a conversation with Raphael. We'll have our panelists as cited, and we are looking forward to this conversation. I'm sure it will be an interesting conversation. Let's prepare and join. Bengt, I hope you read my mail.
Yes.
Very nice discussion. Yes, and a lot of interesting questions in the chat. I was trying to follow along. There's another way of taking notes. It actually seems to be doing a transcription of, this is Wendy's Otter.
It did not work today.
Very nice.
It used to work, but it did not work today. Something went wrong today. It is not working.
Really? Okay, I looked at it earlier and it seemed to be working well. I was not familiar with this at all. But Jan, that was very nice. I like the way you did this sequentially. Shall we start with sort of easier questions, or you'd proposed a format, Rash? So, you know.
Lillian, are you back? Lillian, are you back?
Not yet. We should be back in the next 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay.
Okay.
Before we get into the discussion, Rajesh, I'd request you to post again the next meeting for those who had left, so that we all remember.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Here it is.
Started. And I've been admitting people just because it says I can.
Thank you very much. That's great help.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Yeah.
So let's note that the next conversation will be on 11th July. We are all welcome. So for now, we'll go back to the session. We'll have the panel discussion. Our panelists will be able to ask questions to Bengt, and I'll give each of you at least around 15 to 20 minutes for discussion, so that we can allow Bengt to respond to the other questions in the chat and any others that may arise. And if anybody else on the wall has something else to request or ask, you'll be free to ask. So our panelists are Rasma Lema, Anna Bengt, and Marianne Hilma. So I think I'll start with Rasma. Maybe you can have your time with Bengt, 10 to 15 minutes, then we move to the next. You're welcome.
Well, thanks a lot. I think if we spend now 15 minutes, there won't be any time left for discussion if we spend 15 minutes each. So I think we have maybe 5 minutes each or so.
5 minutes each?
So
let's have like 10. The question and discussion should come within the 10 minutes.
Right. Okay. So hi, Bengt. Hi, everyone. First, a very small comment. I cannot resist. Of course, I did a lot of work on green innovation and renewables and catching up in China. And I mean, I think Jan is absolutely right about the case of the wind industry. This is also what we found in our studies. But then, of course, in solar PV and in several other renewable energy technologies, China is actually now a leader in those industries. And I think particularly interesting at the moment is the case of green hydrogen, where China is very cost competitiveness in terms of their electrolyzers. And I think, the potential of that, I would like to discuss with the Q&A whether that is a short cycle technology or not. I think, the core technology of electrolyzers is quite stable, but all the linkage effects in terms of, relatedness to other sectors, the potential for decarbonized production and so on, that's a really fascinating case from China. Well, so anyway, I am Rasmus Lima. I'm at the UNU Merit in Maastricht, but I used to work with Bengt at Aalborg University and very much in the Global League Secretariat. And I'm still very active in Global League, and I'm so happy to see all of the participants, the long-time participants from Global League in this conversation. So Bengt was very instrumental in setting up Global League. That's 20 years ago. So we are now entering our birthday year with a number of sessions, and we will have a big thing at the next conference in India to celebrate our 20th birthday. And of course, one of the things we are doing is taking stock of our research agenda, looking to our future research agenda. We are living in very different times than we did 20 years ago. We've discussed some of the things, green transformation, digital transformations, and we need to take account of those. So this is my question for Bengt, but my specific question, it's related but also different. The question is how the innovation studies community in general and Global League specifically can best respond to the overwhelming demand for challenge-led, mission-oriented and directed innovation paths. I think this is very much high on the agenda, something where Global League as a community need to be strong in our response to that agenda. And I think, in terms of directed trajectories and, as you discussed, innovation is not always good. And you indeed, I think, were one of the first people to make this point in your work from the mid-1980s on user-producer interaction, showing how some innovations were in fact unsatisfactory innovations. So I think you were important in putting that together. Also, even before that, in the late 70s, Dick Nelson, in his book On the Moon and the Ghetto, it was highlighting the sort of directed nature of social and technical change. So these very important discussions you had so many years ago, I mean, the relevance of those, I think, now is obvious to everybody. So how can we re-engage with those ideas to bring our agenda forward? Thanks.
I think the understanding that environment, that innovation has a very important role to play, has been with us for quite some time. I remember this concept, unsatisfactory innovation, came out of a series of case studies in Denmark. And one of them was about purifying water. I don't know what the technical terminology should be. And what we found was that there were missing links between producers of sensor technology and biological research. There was kind of gap which needed to be closed, and actually that didn't happen by itself, by market forces. And I actually think that our case study had some impact, and we might be in similar situation today, where I could imagine that artificial intelligence, when it's linked up with managing managing green technologies, etc., could have a major impact, but it will might not happen by itself. I mean, we have this, that was one aspect. I also actually took part in some meeting in the 1970s, I think, or beginning of 80s, with people who were responsible for the grid in Denmark. And there were attempts to link up windmills and green technologies with the grid. But the dominant suppliers, which were coal-fired, they did everything to stop this and said it was completely silly and we should never do that. And I had similar meetings with the International Energy Agency in the beginning of the 1990s in Paris, where we discussed user-producer, the lack of links between suppliers of green technology and the grid. So I would say there is some history about how you can think about these things. I think the moon and the ghetto was slightly different. I think one of the major points is that it's much easier to mobilize science to go to the moon than to mobilize science, which is not, because there's so much tacit knowledge and things like that in relation to changing the ghetto. I think that's the way I read it. And I think there's something I would like to say in relation to your question. And I think any strategy of transformation, because we all talk about transformation, innovation, should have at least two objectives as dimension. And one of them is related to, could be related to global warming and things, but the other one is income distribution. I think we need, in a sense, have both into the equation. Otherwise, we will not get a sustainable world or a sustainable dimension. And actually now there is some growing understanding for the need of a green transformation, but much less so. Much less agreement when it comes to income distribution issues at the global level between countries or within countries. And I think that is a major task, how to get these two things to work together. But that is going beyond your question.
Thank you, Val and Rasma. I think I'll give this opportunity to Anna. 10 minutes for the question and answer.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Bengt and also Jan, for the interesting discussion so far. So I was wondering, Bengt, if you could tell us a bit about your experiences of working with policymakers and providing advice to them, perhaps both regionally and nationally. And you mentioned also internationally here in the International Energy Agency. So kind of what activities and initiatives have you been engaged with, and what were the results? And perhaps you have some interesting anecdotes to share as well, perhaps both successes and failures that you think could be interesting for the audience.
Yeah, I could talk about this for another hour or so, but I'm afraid I'm not allowed. I have actually visited the party, the Chinese Communist Party Central in Beijing, and discussed with strategy with people there. I've been in the White House discussing strategy with US experts close to Clinton. I have been in Downing Street, trying to inspire labor, etc. So I tried different things. I worked almost 3 years at OECD in the midst of policy making on science, technology, and innovation. And I have worked very closely with the different ministries in Denmark and in other countries. So if I should bring this down to a few words, I would say the demand side is so important. It's so important in the sense that if the situation is not mature, your capacity to convince people is very limited, even if you are having very good arguments. It's a question of if there is a demand, and that comes in periods. I mean, now the area Rasmus is referring to, there is a growing demand. There's somebody with a microphone on, I think. But anyhow, that's my first point. And when I came to OECD, it was very tough to get ahead with ideas about innovation policy. But then we got a new president in, I came 92, 93, Clinton started, and all the other directors, they came to me and said, now Lundvall, you have a chance. You got Laura Tyson, you got other people who will understand what you're talking about. And this made a major difference. I got a chance to go over there and talk to them. In another area was a very special experience was in Denmark. We had, actually, I think Jan Fagerberg took part in a meeting with the Secretary General of the Ministry of Industry. Do you remember that, Jan? Yeah, he nods. And they were quite special because they had realized that innovation was very important. And we got funding for 2 PhDs, which should spend half that time in the ministry and half the time doing research. And this developed a kind of personal relationship, which made it possible to actually realize. It resulted in 2000 in a program which should change Denmark 2000 or something like that. The only problem was that almost at the same time as the program should be realized, we got a new government. And Social Democrats went out, and everything which had been on the top of their list of priorities went down to the bottom, including environment. I mean, we had Sven Auken, who was a very strong personality pushing for environment. And so again, the demand side is very important. But of course, and also the competence of policymakers. I mean, if they know a little about also have some academic knowledge, so they can easily translate your concepts into practical action. And of course, you can try to educate policymakers in that sense. But if the demand is not there, you cannot do much.
Thank you. Marianne, over to you.
Very good. Thank you. This has really been an interesting discussion. And so, Bengt, as I read your article in Research Policy and also the book with Cecilia, I like the way you talk about corporate innovation systems embedded within national innovation systems. And your arguments resonate with the idea that Western capitalism has reached a crisis stage and that the global power amassed by these large monopolistic corporations, with national governments being complicit, is going to sort of create this new sort of almost militaristic techno-nationalist kind of strategies. The interests of companies and of nations are so aligned. It's difficult for me to see how we could affect policy to address these monopolies because they provide so much national advantage. And so, I just, first of all, remarkable to me how optimistic you remain in light of these changes. So I just would like to have you talk about that a little bit more, how we break this cycle.
Yeah, just one first comment is that they are not completely aligned. They are not completely aligned. I mean, it is still the fact that Microsoft, for instance, as one of the big ones, they are deeply involved in China's research system. And I think they will use some of their power to try to avoid a complete break between the two countries. And if we stay at the very high level of the conflict US-China, I mean, if things really go badly, and this might be in relation to the Ukraine crisis, it might be in relation to the world economy more generally. I would not exclude the possibility that United States and China leadership will begin to think more about the costs of breaking down or cutting or really. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't exclude that. And of course, I think one of the areas where I see some hope is very much related to the environmental issues. I mean, what's unique for the environmental issues is that, and this has more to do with the moon than with the ghetto in a sense. It's scientists who actually have played a major role in helping to mobilize broad sectors of people. And it has even led to some elements of global governance, much too weak so far, but it's still there, and there's something which could be built further upon in that direction. So these are some of and the final hope is that we actually never knows what's happened. Sometimes a very small event can start a process which we couldn't see in our best imagination. I had a discussion with somebody US who talked about how the Floyd killing actually dramatically changed the debate in United States. So, I mean, we cannot there's no reason to exclude positive outcomes. That's the best I can say.
And, you know, just very quickly, and while I have the chance, you have been throughout your career an organization builder, an institution builder, and I've been the beneficiary of some of these institutions. Specifically, Rasmus mentioned GlobalX, but last week we had the Druid meeting, so 350 people. And so what's the secret? You know, what have you learned about building an enduring and vibrant organization?
No, I think the trick is very simple. You get the right people to create the core. First, I mean, again, I must mention that I had a fantastic backing in my research group in Aalborg in Denmark, the I group. You know some of these people, and without that, I couldn't have taken off and created broader networks. You need this kind of collectivity as a kind of background. The second thing is then that getting a small core of very nice people who can attract other people. And then you do also bad things in the sense that if people are not nice, you try to get rid of them. If they, for instance, cheat or try to work for money or are not willing to share knowledge, knowledge sharing is very important. I think I have been very privileged because all the places, with the exception of OECD, of course, all the other places were open and knowledge sharing and diverse. This, I think, is and it's of course also a cultural thing. As I said before, people like Chris Freeman and Dick Nelson, they have created the basis on which one can build. I mean, we don't have this standard economics, extreme competitive, aggressive style. And also, I think I very consciously you said that Druid was very diverse. You should come to GlobalX. It's much more diverse. Huh? And when you combine Latin Americans with Japanese and Koreans and Chinese with Nordic people, etc., you must, in a sense, very consciously exploit diversity. You must exploit it, and you must, of course, insist on a high degree of tolerance, because people are very different and they have very different priorities. But you must have kind of rules that all should live together. Okay, sorry, that's what I could say.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Just before you respond to the questions from the chat, which I've shared, I know that you have them, you'll be able to respond to all of them. We can just have a follow-up question from Rasma. I know these discussions are quite interesting and many of us will want to continue. But I believe these interactions is very important to many of us, if not all of us on this platform. And I believe a lot of new knowledge is going to be generated out of these discussions, especially from the young scholars. Therefore, I'll give this opportunity to Rasma to ask you a question. Then I'll ask Bengt to respond to the questions from Mamu, Veronica, that I'd already shared, from Chandra, and also from Beatrice. Thereafter, I'll give you just other 2 questions before we close. 1 minute for you, Rasma, then you can respond to all of them at a go.
Thanks. Thanks for giving us the opportunity for for practicing some interactive learning. So in respect to your what you said, I think I agree that the moon and the ghetto is very much about what you talked about, you know, STI kind of dynamics in one field, and much more complex social dynamics in another field. But there's also another point with that book, and that is that the Moon Project was a mission, and the Ghetto Project was never really a mission. So this was absolutely key in terms of where are the political priorities for what should we be doing. And I think, you know, in fact, with respect to the case of AI in China, China has also taken a kind of mission approach to developing that field and several other forefront and very important fields. So the question in that sense is about missions. I mean, GlobalX was established not just to study the world, but actually also, you know, do some change in the world. So my question then can be specified. If you were to establish GlobalX today, and not 20 years ago, you know, would it not only be about innovation systems, but also about missions as a key component of that?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not sure because it's a question of how you define innovation. I mean, I always insist on very broad definition, and of course, when I link it to the learning economy and the kind of distributional aspect, the role of transformation pressure and stuff like that, it gets even broader. So in that sense, I think it's still so what would you propose yourself? I mean, I mean, please answer your question.
I can't answer my question. That's why I'm putting it to you.
Okay.
But what I can say is at least that this discussion, I think, is one that we will take up and unfold as we are working on defining the GlobalX agenda for the coming years. But of course, it's, I mean, the major point is, you know, how do we deal with this issue of directionality, which everybody agrees about is so important. But, you know, there are some proposals out there for how to deal with that, but some of it is not so, let me say, conceptually operational. But we do have operational concepts from, you know, our field. So how can we build on those to really transform the agenda? That's the question.
Okay, I will think about that, and we have to discuss it more at next time we meet. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
I think that is fine. You can now go ahead and respond to the questions from Mamu, Veronica, Beatrice, and Chandra. If you can be brief, that will be fine, so that I give you the next brief from Rajesh and Veronica, so that before we clear. Welcome.
I will, Mamu, can pose a question or what?
Mamu, would you like to pose it again? Just
Could
1 minute, briefly.
Yeah, I think it's better he does it on camera.
No.
Yeah, there is.
No. Is it? Sorry. I raised the question already. I raised it before. Economics has contributed, I think, to the current danger we are in now. Is there any chance to use innovation to innovate economics with a way to include validation criteria that includes nature, the human well-being, not gained by some profit, but loss for some, but some arrangement to rethink it, the mindset approach. Since you've been on it for many years, Is there any suggestion you have? Because the world as we are in now is going in the wrong direction. So, and economics and the self-interest of the different actors, stakeholders, have contributed to the risk we are in. How can we create a new sustainable development which includes everyone rather than create divisions, wars, conflicts, climate change, COVID, many of these dangers? That's what I just want you to rethink economics with innovation. And since you are an innovation expert, can you please tell us what innovation can do? That's my suggestion. It's a general philosophical question, more or less. Thank you. Thank you, my Bal.
Thank you. I mean, I would like to say something which relates to your question. And that is that I think we as social scientists should have a double role. I think it's legitimate to do what Anna asked me about, trying to give good advice and trying to help manage this world. But the other thing we need to do at the same time or in parallel is to have a kind, and this is, I think, you are expressing here, a critical historical view, a view. I like what Sweezy called, he wrote a book called The Present as History, which means that you take a step back and you do in Marxist tradition, look at what are the major contradictions in the and problems in the development you see. And I think a problem very often is that either you are on the management side or the more critical side. I think Chris Freeman was exemplary because he really did both. And if we want to contribute a small contribution to a better world, I think we need to combine these two perspectives. And of course, I think that a key issue is about giving people capacity to govern their own life. And that has to do with education and things like that, giving them resources. And it also is a question about institutions, which makes it possible to transform what people really want. And here, I assume that people want more than material stuff into real change. But of course, well, your question, I'm not sure. War, you can say, war between countries has been around before Adam Smith. So I'm not sure that economics as a discipline has, I do think it has done a lot of damage in many respects, but I'm not sure you can say that it's the cause of all evil in this. That might be to exaggerate. Thank you. Is it okay?
Thank you very much. That's a wonderful.
Thank you, Bal and Mamu. Beatrice, would you want to ask your question again? Or have you got it right, Bentoke? so that you just
No, I
respond?
think I like people to give the question on the screen, because I
Beatrice?
cannot read all these at the side. I mean, there are so many, and I don't know which one I should take.
Beatrice?
Yes, good morning. At least for me here in Brazil, it's good morning. The thing is, most of the research on innovations and innovation systems relies on the national space.
Mhm.
The thing is, in what extent geopolitics and competition among rich countries for hegemony is a constraint or are a constraint for
Mhm.
national policies in developing countries?
Mhm.
And what is the difference between the US policy towards Latin America and towards Asian countries, and how this reflects in their current state of affairs in development and innovation? Because most literature on innovation systems do not deal with this macro level geopolitics and so on, and what is the trend. Sometimes a circular approach. You have to innovate to be innovative. You have to have the capabilities to innovate, and you have to be developed to become developed.
That was several questions as far as I could hear. I would like to say a few words about the national level. I mean, the national innovation system, when we developed that concept, we were, of course, quite aware that the national systems are open systems, and a lot of innovation takes place between countries. And in my most recent book with Cecilia, I mean, this is you can say it's an extreme case where you have these tech giants organizing innovation processes all over the world in corporate system where one major company dominates a number of subordinate units. And at the same time, as we talked about before, we have a tendency towards techno-nationalism, and it means that the willingness to share knowledge across national borders becomes more and more limited. More and more strategic thinking about what knowledge to share and not to share, etc. Your specific question on how this relates to United States and respectively Asia and Latin America, I guess you are more expert on that than I am. I have a suspicion that the reason you ask this question is that you have thought about it. So perhaps you should add something on that yourself, Beatrice.
I studied that on the PhD on the pharmaceutical industry, and I compared both the US and the Brazilian case from the late 19th century up to the early 21st century. And what I saw in terms of the Brazilian case was that the policy towards Brazil from the US was kind of, this was their backyard.
Sure.
So most of our policies were like a bumps in the road. So we did something, but we never moved it actually forward. And then we did several diagnoses on why we didn't catch up and put in place the same policies over and over again. When you see the Chinese or even the other Asian countries, they were more important for the US after the Second World War than was Brazil, Mexico, the problem of the US was Cuba, but Cuba has gone through a very different path on pharmaceuticals. But for the rest of Latin America, we kept as late developing countries, and we can never do the catch up because this is kind of impossible for us. The US put a limitation in my opinion, and they did not put the same limitation.
So you are not very
optimistic. Politics.
You are not very optimistic that if you get a new leadership in Brazil, that
No.
this would change.
No, it didn't change because
Okay.
it didn't change. It didn't change previously with different kind of a government. We have had some kind of development, but not in the sense of what we saw in the case of the Asian countries after the Second World War. We didn't see this in Brazil. We don't see that in Mexico. We don't see this in other Latin American countries.
But of course, to some degree, that has to do with the characteristics of China I talked about before, the massive investment in knowledge, both from the top and from the bottom. I don't think this has happened in Brazil or to some degree, as you say, perhaps in Cuba, but otherwise not so much. But I think we need to move to the next question. But that's very interesting. Thank you very much, Beatrice.
Thank you, Val and Beatrice. I like your intuition. You know, when somebody asks a question which she or he has an answer.
Often, yes.
I underestimated the timing for responding to the questions. I was thinking each question will take just 5 minutes to respond, and I've realized we are running short of time. We have only 3 questions to go. I would like to ask the participants if you could allow us to take another 15 minutes to respond to the question to Veronica, Judith, and Chandra. Then we end at 6:15. It's my hope that this time the questions will be short and the response also timely.
I will do my best.
Okay, let's have Chandra. Chandra, do you still want to ask your question? Summarize, then Veronica and Judith. You follow in that order, then we'll allow Bal to respond to all of them at a go.
Yeah, am I audible? This is Chandra.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I have 2 set of questions. One is like I tried to be very precise. Like I was trying to, how does this IPR mechanism such as petty patents play a role in encouraging the local or domestic innovations and especially micro and informal forms and all. So that is the one set of a question. And another, I was asking about something like India and China. When the discussion was going on India and China comparison, I was trying to look into the academia, industry, and government linkages in China and India are quite different. Like India's these linkages are very weak in India. So this politics of innovation play a crucial role in what kind of innovations will emerge in solving the real needs of the any country context. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe you can have Judith and Veronica ask, then you can respond to all of them at a go. Thank you. Judith?
Well, in fact, I don't have a question. I was just reminding myself that in 1997, 25 years ago, I met Bengt for the first time in Aalborg Airport. And I just simply want to thank a great intellectual and a very generous man. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Veronica?
Very much.
That's a good commendation. Let's hear from Veronica. Veronica, please.
Veronica is not here at present.
Okay.
We can pass on to the next question.
Rajesh, the next was yours.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask.
Please
Bal,
be brief.
thank you, Bal and John, for this wonderful session. I just want to ask you about your creation, national systems of innovation. How well is it going to fare in the future? Is it going to continue to be important, or is it going to be sidelined by the new emerging thoughts on transformative innovation, etc.?
Thank you, Rajesh. Bal, then someone else who is unanimous says, please say something on the advantages of focusing on learning approach, wider approach, specifically on short cycle technologies. So maybe you can
Specifically
start.
on what technology?
Short cycle technologies.
Okay.
I think those are all the questions we have as per now. Once you
Okay.
respond to that, we are fine.
Okay. Okay. Ray's question, I will start with that. In a sense, the national innovation system in the public sphere, in political debates, etc., has become much more at the center than it was before the China-US conflict. The Chinese, they took the national innovation system as a very important framing for planning in medium and long term. They took it up quite early, already at the end of the 1990s. The US, on the other hand, was very reluctant to take this concept because people thought that it would imply a very active state. It was in the neoliberal era. So they developed other concepts like ecosystems and things like that, what they thought were indicate that these systems were grown by the self, almost like natural organisms. But with the conflict in China, I have seen a radical change in the debate in the US. And now there is no doubt that they are thinking in terms of national innovation systems with a very strong role of the state. In some respects, they engage the state quantitatively in innovation and industrial policy at the level even more than China. So it's to say that is so, but on the other hand, I would say as scholars, we do not need to follow this course. I think we have an obligation to think about how we can move towards global governance with all those global challenges. It's obvious that, for me at least, that they cannot be solved only by cooperation between nation states. You actually need transnational governance, and that could combine governance at regional level, like African Union, European Union, collaborations in Asia, etc. But it also requires a kind of truly global, like Global X, kind of governance. So I would say that while the concept will has become more absorbed in very important mainstream. It has become even more important for us to think how we can go beyond the national towards more global governance.
Thank you very much. I wish to thank you, Bengt, for being so generous with your intellectual knowledge. You made this session very interesting. I wish to thank you, Jean, for leading us during the first session, the first 60 minutes. Your questions made these discussions and interaction very successful. The panelists, Rasma, Marianne, and Anna, thank you very much. It has been a great session because you are here and you are able to ask good questions. The rest of the participants, I just try to imagine if you are not here, what it could have been. Thank you very much for being part and parcel of this team and for being part and parcel of this episode 6. I want to thank Rajesh and the rest of the committee members for the organization and the coordination of these activities. I want to hand over to Rajesh if there's any other question or information you want to share as we prepare to join again on 11th July. We are all welcome and we are looking forward to an interesting session, the 7th episode. Thank you very much for all of you for participating in today's session. We are very grateful even for the extra minutes you gave us. Bengt, you have a word to say?
I would like to thank all those people with whom I've collaborated in first in Gothenburg at the kind of left-wing department then, and in Aalborg with the IKE group, and then with European colleagues like Lux Söte, and then with all my fantastic global colleagues like Judith, Mamo, and many close Chinese friends and Indian friends and so on. I just want to say that this kind of collaboration we have had has been a mixture of sharing knowledge and developing ideas and having a wonderful time together. So I want to thank you for all this, and I'm very happy with my career so far, and I hope it will last still a couple of years because I think it's still quite fun. Okay.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes.
A hand clap to all of us. Rajesh, over to you.
Thank you, Lillian, for that wonderful sharing. And before leaving, can we have a couple of snaps? Can we all switch on the cameras? Yeah. A few more, please. Let's take a picture. Some more cameras, please. Yeah, I think that's all. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you.
So wonderful to see you. Thank you so much. Keep strong, live longer.
As long as possible. Yeah.
We want you more. We need you more.